People say betrayal is a stab in the back, but they are wrong. It is a slow poison, stirred into your morning coffee with a smile. For 4 years, I thought I was building a home, unaware I was just a pawn to a narcissist. That night, amidst glittering lights and mocking laughter, one message shattered my illusion. He expected a broken, weeping wife. He forgot that I design ruthless security systems, and now, he is my target. Hello to our wonderful audience at Violet Revenge Stories. We are so deeply grateful for your continued support, but unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving our channel without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these amazing stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the comments of this video. My name is Harper Phillips. I am a quiet data analyst at Aegis Core Solutions, a world away from the glittering, cutthroat reality of Silicon Valley venture capital that my husband thrives in. Tonight was supposed to be a triumph. The ballroom of the Grand Hotel was suffocating under the weight of forced elegance, drowning in the heavy scent of rare orchids and the constant clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Julian, my flashy husband and a formidable venture capitalist, was completely in his element. He wore his charm like a flawlessly tailored suit, effortlessly navigating the sea of conservative investors and tech billionaires. I stood beside him for hours, the dutiful and silent wife playing her part, until the sensory overload and the fake smiles became too much to bear. Seeking a brief moment of quiet solitude, I slipped away toward the private bar at the far edge of the outdoor terrace. I stepped behind a heavy silk partition to catch my breath, finding the cool night air a welcome relief against my flushed skin. That was when I heard his voice. It was Julian, holding court with a group of his key partners. His tone was casual, laced with that signature arrogance that I used to mistake for genuine confidence. "You have to play the game. Gentlemen," Julian chuckled, the sound grating against the soft jazz playing in the background. "Conservative boards want a family man. They want stability. So, I gave them the perfect illusion." Another man laughed, the sound thick with expensive whiskey and privilege. "But Harper, she is practically invisible. How do you stand the boredom?" Julian sighed, a theatrical display of burden. "She is a boring programming puppet. She barely speaks unless it is about data streams or encryption protocols. But she is clean, she is quiet, and she makes me look grounded. It is a necessary sacrifice for the image. By the end of this year, once the new fund is fully secured, I am going to kick her out. I have already made sure she will leave with empty hands. She will not even see it coming." The men erupted into cruel, echoing laughter. Standing in the shadows, I felt all the air leave my lungs. The crystal glass in my hand suddenly felt freezing cold against my skin. This was the man I had loved, the man I had cooked dinners for, the man whose anxieties I had soothed in the dead of night. 4 years of my youth, 4 years of building what I believed was a sanctuary, reduced to a strategic business move. The betrayal did not hit me like a sudden blow. It seeped into my veins like ice water. He expected me to be the fragile, invisible woman he just described. He expected tears, a public breakdown, and absolute devastation. Instead, I took a deep breath. Smoothing the fine fabric of my dress, I stepped out from behind the silk partition and walked directly into the center of their circle. The laughter died instantly. The partners froze, their eyes darting nervously between Julian and me. Julian turned around, his charming smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he desperately tried to recover his composure. Before he could utter a single word of excuse, I raised my hand and gently placed my glass of vintage champagne right into his palm. I did not scream. I did not cry. I looked directly into his eyes, pinning him under a gaze as cold and unforgiving as a steel blade. I offered him a perfectly polite, chilling smile. "Good luck with your cover," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. I did not wait for his response. I turned and walked away, the sharp click of my heels against the marble floor echoing in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. I felt the weight of a dozen shocked stares burning into my back, but I did not falter for a single second. It was only when I reached the dark isolation of my car that the adrenaline finally began to fade. The sky had broken open, and heavy rain pounded against the windshield, distorting the glowing streetlights of the city into blurry streaks of yellow and red. I gripped the steering wheel tight, fighting desperately to control the violent shaking of my hands, my chest to heave as the crushing reality truly set in. Every shared smile, every anniversary dinner, every quiet morning was nothing but a calculated, cruel scam. I was merely a pawn on his chessboard. Suddenly, the dark interior of the car was illuminated by the harsh glare of my phone screen. A notification flashed. It was a text message from Marcus, Julian's closest friend and his prime legal partner, a man who had always kept a respectful, almost guarded distance from me. I opened the message, my eyes scanning the text as a new, far more dangerous chill ran down my spine. Do not sign any tax documents tomorrow. He is setting a trap to send you to prison. Meet me at underground parking lot B4 at 2 in the morning. The underground parking lot on level B4 was a concrete cavern, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of flickering fluorescent lights. The air smelled of stale exhaust and damp earth, heavy with a claustrophobic silence that pressed against my eardrums. My footsteps echoed far too loudly against the pavement as I navigated between the massive concrete pillars. I kept my right hand buried deep inside the pocket of my trench coat, my thumb resting heavily on the record button of a small, digital audio device. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. Marcus was Julian's right hand, his attack dog in every corporate buyout. For all I knew, this entire late-night rendezvous was just another layer of the trap closing in around me. Headlights suddenly swept across the far wall, casting long, monstrous shadows over the concrete. A dark sedan pulled into a spot 3 spaces away. The engine died, and the heavy door opened. Marcus stepped out into the dim light, and the sight of him made me pause. He looked nothing like the sharp, unshakable legal partner I knew. His expensive tie was pulled loose, his collar was wrinkled and dark. Bruised circles shadowed his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, vibrating with a nervous, exhausted energy. He walked toward me, his eyes darting instantly to the ceiling corners where the security cameras usually hung. Though I knew this blind spot was completely undocumented, he stopped a few feet away, reaching slowly inside his suit jacket. Every muscle in my body tensed, ready to run. "I am not recording you, Harper," Marcus said, his voice a raspy whisper that barely carried over the low hum of the distant ventilation fans. "But you should definitely keep yours running. You are going to need every single piece of leverage you can get." He held out a heavy, encrypted black flash drive. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before snatching it from his grip. My eyes locked on his face. "What exactly is this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the cold adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The autopsy of your marriage," Marcus replied bitterly, running a hand over his tired face. "And the detailed blueprint for your destruction. Julian is not just cheating on you, Harper. The infidelity is just a symptom of his massive ego. The real crime is what he is planning to do to your career and your freedom." I gripped the cold metal of the drive tighter. "Speak plainly, Marcus. No legal games." "Julian is completely broke," Marcus stated flatly, his words slicing through the damp air like a scalpel. "His last 3 venture capital bets collapsed, and he has been masking the catastrophic losses from his partners for months. He desperately needs a massive influx of cash, and he found it sitting right inside your work laptop. He is stealing the core encryption algorithm you designed for Aegis Core Solutions. He has already lined up a shadow buyer, a rival conglomerate operating out of Asia. The agreed payout is tens of millions of dollars." My analytical mind raced, assembling the data points with ruthless efficiency. That algorithm requires multi-factor biometric authentication to even export a fragment of the codebase. He cannot just plug in a drive and copy it. He does not need to hack your machine. Marcus leaned closer, the tension radiating from his frame. Tomorrow morning, over coffee, he is going to hand you a stack of tax documents. He will casually mention it is a standard joint filing requirement for his new investment fund. Do not sign them. Hidden deep within those pages, buried in the legal jargon, is a perfectly crafted intellectual property transfer agreement. He hired an offshore shadow firm to draft it. Once you sign your name on that dotted line, you legally hand him backdoor ownership and the master keys to your proprietary code. The sheer audacity of the plan left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, but the logic was utterly flawless. And what happens after he sells it, the moment the code is utilized, I will notice the breach. You will not have the chance to notice anything, Marcus said, his voice dropping another terrifying octave. Once the transfer is complete and the money clears his offshore accounts, Julian plans to make a highly detailed, anonymous tip to the FBI. He is going to frame you for economic espionage. He has already planted fabricated communication logs on your home network firewall, making it look like you were the one actively negotiating with foreign agents. By the time the federal agents kick down your office door, Julian will play the devastated, betrayed husband. You will be arrested without bail. Your personal assets will be frozen immediately, and due to the federal felony charges, you will forfeit every single cent of your marital property in the divorce. Federal prison, absolute public disgrace, complete financial ruin. He was not just throwing me away. He was systematically planning to burn my entire existence to the ground just to warm his own hands. I stared at Marcus, analyzing the sharp lines of his face, searching for the hidden deception. You are his senior legal partner. You are his best friend. If this plan succeeds, you stand to make an absolute fortune in consulting fees alone. Why are you risking total disbarment and federal conspiracy charges to hand me this warning? Marcus looked away, staring at the cold concrete floor for a long, agonizing moment. When he finally met my gaze again, the absolute vulnerability in his eyes took me completely off guard. Because I have watched him break innocent people for years, Marcus said quietly, his voice tight with suppressed anger. I justified it because it was just business, but this is entirely different. Harper, I have watched you build your career from nothing. I have watched the quiet dignity you carry every single day, the sheer brilliance you hide, just so his fragile ego does not shatter. I have spent the last 4 years silently admiring you from across the room while he treated you like a convenient appliance. He took a step back, the heavy shadows instantly reclaiming his face. Julian is a monster, and I absolutely refuse to stand by and watch the only woman I have ever truly respected get crushed under the weight of his bottomless greed. Take the drive. Build your defense. You have less than 48 hours before he pulls the trigger. Marcus turned and walked back to his car, his footsteps heavy and hollow against the concrete. I stood completely alone in the dim light, the encrypted drive burning a hole against my palm. The shock was entirely gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Julian thought he was playing a master game of chess against a blind, naive opponent, but he forgot one crucial detail about the woman he married. I was the architect of the board, and I was about to rewrite all the rules. The morning sun filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of our kitchen, casting long, sharp shadows across the cold marble island. I stood by the espresso machine, listening to the rhythmic grinding of the roasted beans, carefully adjusting my posture. When dealing with a narcissist, the most dangerous weapon you can wield is their own overinflated ego. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction. I allowed my eyes to remain slightly downcast, reddened just enough to suggest a sleepless night spent quietly crying into a pillow. When Julian finally walked into the room, dressed in a crisp white shirt and perfectly tailored trousers, he looked entirely pleased with himself. He poured a cup of coffee, his movements casual and completely relaxed. He genuinely believed his cruel display at the gala had broken my spirit, reducing me to the silent, submissive pawn he so desperately needed me to be. I have a busy morning. Harper, Julian said, his tone carrying a practiced edge of gentle authority, completely ignoring the horrific things he had said the night before. He casually tossed a thick, neatly bound folder onto the marble counter. My new venture fund is closing its first round of capital tomorrow. The board requires our joint tax filings and standard marital disclosure agreements to finalize the compliance checks. Just sign the sticky notes. I will have my assistant file them by noon. I looked down at the documents. To an untrained eye, they looked like standard financial boilerplate. But thanks to Marcus, I knew exactly what venom lay hidden beneath the dense paragraphs of legal jargon on page 47. It was the intellectual property transfer, the very document designed to hand him the keys to my life's work and subsequently send me to a federal penitentiary. "Of course, Julian," I murmured softly, keeping my voice utterly devoid of friction. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my own fountain pen. It was a heavy silver-plated instrument I had custom-ordered months ago. The ink cartridge inside did not contain standard black dye. It contained a highly specialized, chemically altered magnetic compound used in extreme corporate espionage. The deep black ink flowed smoothly onto the paper, binding with the cellulose fibers perfectly, but within 48 hours, exposed to the ambient oxygen in the air, the chemical bonds would completely break down. The ink would evaporate without leaving a single microscopic trace behind. By the time the federal investigators eventually seized this document, they would find nothing but blank pages. I signed my name on every single dotted line, handing him a perfectly executed, completely worthless illusion. Julian smiled, a sickening expression of triumph crossing his handsome face, and scooped up the folder. "I am going to take a quick shower before my first meeting," he announced, turning away without a second glance. The moment I heard the heavy glass door of the master bathroom slide shut and the rush of high-pressure water hit the tiles, my entire demeanor shifted. The fragile wife vanished, replaced instantly by the senior security architect. I had exactly 15 minutes. I moved silently down the hallway and slipped into his private home office. His primary laptop sat on the mahogany desk. Julian was arrogant, but he was not stupid. He used a dynamic biometric lock coupled with a rotating cryptographic key. Unfortunately for him, I was the one who had originally configured his home network security. I bypassed the firewall through a backdoor I had coded into the router firmware 3 years ago, remotely disabling the biometric requirement for exactly 3 minutes. The screen flickered to life. My fingers flew across the keyboard with punishing speed. I did not log in to delete the stolen Aegis Core algorithm. Deletion was amateur work. It would instantly trigger an automated alert to his phone, and he would know I was onto him. Instead, I opened the core architecture of the stolen code and began to write. I crafted a flawless, devastating piece of malware, a digital Trojan horse, and carefully stitched it deep inside the algorithm's execution sequence. The malicious code was designed to remain completely dormant, utterly invisible to any standard antivirus scan. I programmed a highly specific trigger. The virus would only awaken when it detected the unique hardware configuration, IP address range, and display drivers of the presentation systems at the Grand Hotel, the exact venue where Julian was scheduled to unveil his shell company to his new investors. Once plugged into that specific podium, the Trojan would execute, bypassing all local security and hijacking the entire audiovisual network. Just as I compiled the final line of code and sealed the file, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a heavily encrypted, self-destructing text message from Marcus. The shadow funds had been intercepted, $2.5 million successfully rerouted into a blind, frozen legal escrow. His offshore accounts are completely empty. He is running on fumes. I allowed myself a cold, razor-thin smile. Marcus had done his part brilliantly. Julian was now financing his lavish lifestyle and his grand corporate launch with money that no longer existed. We were systematically cutting off his oxygen, and he was still breathing out of pure habit. Before logging out, I ran a rapid sweep of his hidden local directories, looking for any secondary backups of the code. What I found instead was a deeply buried, encrypted communication log linked to an offshore server. I ran a quick brute force decryption script on the password cache. The folders snapped open, revealing thousands of private messages and audio files. It was not just communication with the Asian conglomerate buying the stolen tech. It was a private, highly explicit chat log. I started reading the most recent messages, my eyes narrowing as the final missing piece of the puzzle violently clicked into place. His mistress was not just some random socialite. Her name was Chloe. She was the senior audit director for the exact rival conglomerate that was purchasing my stolen algorithm. The depth of the conspiracy was staggering. Julian was not acting alone. Chloe was actively manipulating her own company's internal due diligence reports, deliberately inflating the valuation of Julian's shell company and burying the red flags about the software's true origin. She was using her executive authority to guarantee the multi-million-dollar acquisition went through flawlessly, ensuring they would both walk away rich while I took the fall in federal court. I downloaded the entire archive of their messages, the falsified audit reports, and the audio recordings to my encrypted flash drive. The sound of the shower down the hall abruptly stopped. I wiped my digital footprint from his machine, locked the screen, and stepped out of the office, pulling the door softly shut behind me. Julian was walking into a trap of his own making, hand in hand with the very woman helping him dig my grave. They thought they had engineered the perfect corporate murder. They had no idea the corpse was already standing behind them, holding the match. I did not waste a single second trying to confront Chloe. Confrontation was messy, emotional, and frankly, beneath the standards of a senior security architect. Instead, I sat in the dim light of my home office, routing my connection through a dozen international proxy servers, masking my digital fingerprint until I was nothing but a ghost in the machine. I carefully compiled the falsified audit reports, the explicit audio files where they discussed the illegal corporate valuation, and the digital signatures linking everything back to Chloe's executive terminal. With one final, decisive keystroke, I dropped the entire heavily encrypted package directly into the anonymous whistleblower portal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It was a digital bomb, and the fuse I gave it was incredibly short. It took exactly 36 hours for the shockwave to hit the ground. I monitored Julian's network traffic from the safety of my secondary laptop. His phone began blowing up with heavily encrypted internet calls. I decrypted the routing metadata just enough to see the sheer panic in the frequency of the connections. Chloe was absolutely terrified. The commission had started asking quiet but very pointed questions, requesting internal compliance logs from her firm. The pressure cracked her instantly. She gave Julian a screaming ultimatum over a brief, intercepted audio channel. They could not wait until next month as originally planned. He had to launch the shell company, finalize the transfer of the stolen algorithm, and close the deal by this Friday night, or she was going to cut him loose to save herself from federal prison. The sudden, violent acceleration of the timeline shattered Julian's carefully maintained composure. He was bleeding shadow money that Marcus had secretly frozen in escrow, and now his schedule was slashed to shreds. Panic makes even the smartest people sloppy, and Julian began making fatal digital errors right in front of my eyes. He stopped using his rotating cryptographic keys because they took too long to authenticate. He accessed his offshore server from our home network without bouncing through a virtual private network. He was practically leaving a trail of breadcrumbs illuminated by neon lights, desperately trying to lock down the logistics for his rushed gala. His paranoia eventually spiked to a boiling point, suspecting someone within his circle was leaking his information. He hired a black hat team to tap my personal phone. He wanted to know if his quiet, boring wife was somehow the rat. I noticed the invasive ping on my device almost immediately, but before I could even write a script to retaliate, Marcus stepped in. Working late from his secure legal terminal downtown, Marcus erected a phantom firewall around my device. He brilliantly created a sandbox environment, feeding Julian's hired hackers a continuous, fabricated loop of completely mundane data. They saw me ordering overpriced organic groceries, browsing online catalogs for velvet throw pillows, and texting my sister about dinner recipes. They reported back to Julian that I was exactly what he thought I was: harmless, clueless, and utterly oblivious to his world. That evening, Julian walked into the living room, his face a tight, agonizing mask of forced calm. The dark, bruised circles under his eyes betrayed the crushing pressure he was under, but he plastered on that trademark, blinding smile that investors loved so much. "Harper," he said, pouring himself a massive glass of scotch with a hand that was visibly trembling. "I have some incredible news. We are moving up the launch of the new tech firm. It is happening this Friday night at the Grand Hotel. It is a massive step forward for my career, and I need you by my side. The conservative investors want to see the solid family foundation behind the man. I need you to be there, looking beautiful and supportive." He was demanding his cover for one last show, a final performance before he planned to destroy my life, completely unaware that he was standing on a trapdoor I had just finished building. "Of course," I replied, forcing my voice to sound gentle, proud, and demure. "I would not miss it for the world. I am so happy for your big step. Julian." He kissed my forehead, a cold, empty gesture, and practically sprinted out of the room to take another frantic call from a vendor. The second he was out of sight, my gentle smile vanished. I pulled out a specialized burner device I kept hidden behind the bookshelf. I compiled a highly sensitive data packet containing the exact time, the venue address, and the specific network port Julian would use to connect his drive to the presentation system. I encrypted the beacon with a government-grade cipher and fired it straight into the high-tech cybercrime alert system of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The pieces were locked in place. The timer was set. All that was left was for him to plug in the drive and watch his empire burn. The Grand Hotel's Imperial Ballroom was a blinding sea of crystal chandeliers and intricate gold leaf molding. It was the absolute apex of the city's luxury, a fitting and opulent stage for a $50 million coronation. Hundreds of elite venture capitalists, aggressive tech journalists, and powerful industry giants filled the cavernous space, their hushed conversations creating a thick, buzzing energy of anticipation. Flashbulbs erupted like miniature lightning storms as Julian stood near the front of the stage, bathing in the absolute center of attention. This was his grand masterpiece, the culmination of his meticulous deception. The final ink was about to dry on a $50 million acquisition contract, and he looked every inch the triumphant, untouchable tech visionary. I made my entrance precisely 15 minutes late. I did not slip in through the side doors or blend into the shadows as I had dutifully done for the past 4 years. I walked directly through the towering mahogany main doors, wearing a floor-length, perfectly tailored crimson dress that caught the light like spilled blood. The sharp, rhythmic click of my stilettos cut right through the low murmurs of the crowd. Heads turned instantly. The usual dismissive whispers about Julian's invisible, mousy wife died completely in the throats of the elite. I commanded the room without speaking a single word. Julian caught sight of me as I glided down the center aisle. The practiced, blinding smile on his face froze solid. For a fraction of a second, I saw raw, unfiltered panic flash deep in his eyes. He recognized the fundamental shift in my posture, the predatory, unyielding calm in my gaze. A cold shudder visibly racked his broad shoulders. He desperately wanted to intercept me. He wanted to drag me out of the room by my arm, but he was surrounded by an impenetrable wall of high-definition camera lenses and deeply conservative board members. He was a helpless prisoner of his own carefully constructed image. I took my reserved seat in the very front row, crossing my legs and offering him a devastatingly serene smile. Forced to proceed with the charade, Julian stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. He adjusted his microphone, his hands trembling ever so slightly under the blinding spotlights. But his massive ego quickly took over his fear. He looked out over the massive crowd, projecting his voice with that sickening, charismatic authority that had fooled so many people. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian boomed, the massive surround sound system amplifying his lies to every corner of the ballroom. "Tonight, we are not just launching a technology company, we are completely redefining the future of digital security. What I hold in my hand right now is the greatest invention of my entire life. A proprietary algorithmic core that will fundamentally revolutionize how the world protects its most valuable financial assets. He held up the sleek silver flash drive, the very drive he believed contained the stolen Aegis core architecture. The room broke into polite, eager applause. Julian turned around and plugged the drive directly into the master terminal of the presentation system, syncing it with the towering LED screen that spanned the entire back wall of the stage. A loading bar appeared, projecting a sleek, modern corporate logo. Sitting in the front row, I picked up a delicate crystal flute of vintage champagne from a passing waiter's silver tray. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the crisp, cold liquid soothe my throat. With my free hand, I unlocked my phone resting quietly on my lap. I opened a hidden terminal application I had coded myself. The screen displayed a single, flashing green execution line. The Trojan was wide awake. It had instantly recognized the exact hardware signature, the IP address range, and the display drivers of the Grand Hotel's presentation system. I tapped the glowing screen exactly once. On stage, Julian raised his hands magnanimously to silence the applause, drawing a deep theatrical breath to continue his grand, fraudulent speech. He never got the chance. The massive LED screen behind him abruptly flickered, emitting a harsh, ear-piercing digital screech that made several wealthy investors violently cover their ears. The sleek corporate logo shattered into a chaotic storm of dead pixels. The hall plunged into a tense, confused silence. Julian whipped around, frantically tapping the podium keyboard, his handsome face rapidly draining of all color. "Just a minor technical glitch. Please bear with us for one moment," Julian stammered, heavy beads of sweat instantly forming on his forehead. Then, the giant screen exploded with undeniable truth. It was not glowing financial projections. It was a massive, high-resolution cascade of private text messages. The explicit, desperate, and highly illegal exchanges between Julian and Chloe lit up the darkened room in 50-foot-tall letters. The entire crowd gasped in collective shock. Before anyone could even process the visual horror, the hotel audio system was violently hijacked. Julian's own voice echoed through the ballroom, completely unedited, recorded straight from the encrypted files I had extracted from his hidden server. "These conservative investors are complete absolute idiots," Julian's recorded voice sneered through the premium speakers, dripping with arrogant contempt. "They just want a good family show. We bleed them for the $50 million. We finalize the transfer of the stolen Aegis Core code, and we leave them holding an entirely empty shell." The ballroom erupted. It was a visceral, chaotic explosion of absolute outrage. Billionaire investors leaped from their seats, their faces twisted in pure fury, shouting demands for their legal teams. Journalists physically shoved past each other, cameras flashing furiously, recording every single second of the spectacular, humiliating meltdown. The towering screen shifted again, displaying the undeniable, hard-coded digital certificates proving the algorithm belonged entirely to Aegis Core Solutions, displayed right alongside the falsified corporate audit reports bearing Chloe's executive digital stamp. Up on the stage, Julian looked like a man who had just been struck by a freight train. He staggered backward, ripping cables out of the podium in a blind, pathetic panic, trying to kill the power. But my virus had locked the hardware at the root level. He mouthed words soundlessly, staring in absolute horror at the towering mountain of his own sins broadcasted to the entire world. He slowly looked down at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying, crushing realization. I raised my champagne glass to him in a silent, deeply satisfying mock toast. Near the back of the chaotic hall, the panic had completely consumed the exit routes. I saw Chloe in her expensive designer gown, her face pale as a sheet, frantically pushing her way through the screaming crowd. She reached the heavy brass handles of the side emergency exit, pulling with all of her desperate might to escape the unfolding nightmare. The doors did not budge a single inch. Stepping out from the dark shadows of the exit corridor was Marcus. He stood tall and completely unmovable. dropping a heavy set of industrial security chains he had just finished wrapping around the exterior handles. He looked directly through the reinforced glass at the terrified mistress, his expression as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. There was no way out. The trap had violently snapped shut, and the walls had completely closed in on them. Julian was a drowning man thrashing in the water, his facade completely obliterated. He grabbed a heavy metal microphone stand and began violently smashing the clear acrylic podium, shattering it into jagged pieces in a desperate, pathetic attempt to physically sever the connection. Blood trickled down his knuckles, but the giant screen behind him remained stubbornly alive, broadcasting his ruin in high definition. Suddenly, the towering mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom burst open with a deafening crash. A tactical unit of federal agents from the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, flanked by senior investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission, flooded into the room. Their heavy boots thundered over the plush carpets as they swiftly secured the perimeter. Julian saw the lead agent approaching the stage and instantly reverted to his original, venomous plan. He pointed a shaking, bloody finger directly at me, his voice cracking in sheer panic. "Arrest her!" Julian screamed, the microphone still picking up his frantic gasps. "My wife is the mastermind. Harper is a corporate spy. She stole the algorithm and planted this entire presentation to frame me." I did not even blink. I just sat in my front row seat, completely undisturbed. The lead agent did not even look my way. Instead, he stared up at the massive LED screen. The Trojan I had designed anticipated this exact desperate lie. With one final automated command, the screen shifted from the explicit text messages to a highly complex string of cryptographic hash functions. It generated a live, undeniable digital certificate, proving flawlessly that the unique hardware signature of Julian's own personal laptop, the very one sitting on the ruined podium, was the absolute origin point of the data theft. "Julian," the lead federal agent said, his voice cold and commanding, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, economic espionage, and the theft of trade secrets. Put your hands behind your back." The sound of the heavy steel handcuffs clicking shut echoed sharply across the silent room. Across the hall, 2 more agents dragged Chloe away from the emergency exit. She was weeping hysterically, her expensive designer gown tangled around her knees, completely stripped of her executive pride. Julian was hauled off the stage, his head bowed, passing right by me without meeting my eyes. In the background, the elite investors were already aggressively dialing their legal teams, frantically pulling their capital, and preparing a massive wave of civil lawsuits. 3 months later, the crisp autumn wind swept through the tall marble pillars of the federal courthouse. I stood quietly in the grand hallway, holding a sleek leather folder. The divorce was officially finalized. Because Julian had committed severe marital fraud and was convicted of multiple federal felonies, the presiding judge awarded me 100% of his remaining legitimate assets. More importantly, the algorithm I had built was legally extracted from Aegis Core through a specialized settlement and officially patented solely under my name. Julian, meanwhile, had just been sentenced to serve 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He was completely bankrupt, absolutely ruined, and permanently banished from the high society he had worshipped so blindly. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the brilliant, blinding sunlight. The air tasted incredibly sweet. At the bottom of the grand stone steps, a sleek black town car was waiting. Marcus leaned casually against the passenger door, looking sharp, rested, and entirely at peace. As I walked down to meet him, he smiled and held out a pristine, freshly bound document. It was the official partnership agreement for our brand new cybersecurity firm. I took the document, my eyes meeting his. We shared a quiet, profound smile of mutual respect and deep understanding. The era of being a silent pawn was officially dead. We were building a new empire, and this time, there was absolutely no room for lies. Thank you so much to our amazing audience for listening to this story on Violet Revenge Stories. We would love to know, Where in the world are you listening from today? Please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's story empowering, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can support their families and continue creating these thrilling stories for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next story.